Leo. Pause for a moment because there's something very special about the energy surrounding the beginning of June. I keep picking up on someone who's thinking about you far more than they'd probably like to admit. They've been trying to keep everything to themselves, trying to act like they're fine, like they've moved forward without looking back. But the more they try to keep going, the more they seem to realize that your presence still finds its way into their thoughts in the most unexpected moments. This person has been reflecting on a lot lately. They've been revisiting old choices, the distance that once existed between the two of you, and even the feelings they tried so hard to ignore. And what's interesting is that the more they try to explain everything through logic, the harder it becomes to dismiss what their heart is actually feeling. I also feel like there's a period of growth happening here. Someone is beginning to see things from a very different perspective. They're starting to recognize things they couldn't fully see before, especially the value of someone who left a much deeper impact on their life than they once realized. Okay, so if you're listening to this, trust your intuition. Take what resonates with you and leave the rest behind. Allow yourself to keep only what genuinely feels aligned with your own experience. Because it feels like someone is slowly coming to understand that this connection may have meant more to them than they originally believed. And from here, the real story begins. I feel like this person once believed you were only going to be a very brief chapter in their life. Not because you weren't important. If anything, it may have been the opposite. The feeling you brought into their world was so different from anything they had experienced before that they didn't quite know what to do with it. So they gave it simpler names, a coincidence, a passing attraction. An interesting person who happened to show up at the right time. But what's strange is that time never seemed to make those feelings disappear. Usually, when someone simply passes through our lives, the memories begin to fade. The conversations become distant, the emotions settle down, and eventually everything finds its place in the past. But with you, it doesn't feel like that's what happened here. I see someone who has tried many times to focus on other things. Work, responsibilities, relationships, personal goals. They've filled their schedule with all kinds of distractions, hoping they wouldn't have to think too much about what was happening inside of them. And yet, you still seem to find your way back into their mind during the most ordinary moments. A familiar song comes on while they're driving, a random comment from someone they barely know, a coffee shop they haven't visited in a while, a quiet moment in the middle of a busy day, and suddenly, they realize they're thinking about you again. Wow, the energy of the star card feels very strong here. Not in a mystical way. More like you've become a light they keep noticing, even when they're not actively looking for it. Some people enter our lives and disappear without a trace. Others leave behind a feeling that lingers long after they've left the room. You seem to be that feeling for them. And honestly, I don't think they ever intended for things to go this far. At first, they believed they were completely in control of their emotions. They thought they could keep their distance whenever they wanted. They thought they were logical enough not to get pulled into anything too deep. But little by little, something changed. Not just because of attraction, not just because of chemistry, but because they genuinely began to enjoy your presence in their life. They enjoyed conversations that seemed completely ordinary. They enjoyed hearing your perspective. They enjoyed the way you looked at the world. They enjoyed the feeling of being themselves around you. And that's when things started becoming more complicated. Because it's easy to forget a temporary attraction. It's much harder to forget the peace someone brings into your life. I also feel like there are many emotions here that have never been spoken out loud. The King of Cups card comes through as someone who keeps a great deal hidden beneath the surface. From the outside, they may seem perfectly fine, calm, composed, like nothing usual is happening at all. But underneath that still water, there is so much movement, so many thoughts, so many feelings. Some of them have never been shared with anyone else. And honestly, some of them haven't even been fully admitted to themselves. Part of them is still trying to find a logical explanation for all of this. Why do they think about you this much? Why does your presence still linger in their mind after all this time? Why haven't other connections created the same feeling? And the more they ask themselves those questions, the more they realize they don't really have a clear answer. The only thing they seem to know is that something about you reached a place deep within their heart. The Ace of Cups card and the Lover's card both carry that feeling. This connection opened something inside of them that they never expected to open. Not overnight, not through one dramatic moment, but gradually, quietly, almost without them realizing it. It's like they accidentally allowed you through doors they had kept closed for a very long time. And by the time they noticed, You had already become part of their emotional world. But at the same time, there's also a quiet struggle happening here. Because recognizing a feeling is one thing. Facing that feeling is something entirely different. And it feels like that inner conflict is leading them toward a very different chapter of their journey. Because what they're beginning to see now isn't only about their feelings for you, it's also about parts of their life they can no longer keep ignoring. It feels like for a very long time, this person lived inside patterns that felt familiar to them. Familiar ways of thinking, familiar choices, familiar types of people. They truly believed they knew what they wanted out of life. They thought they had seen enough, experienced enough, and learned enough that very little could still surprise them. But then, something started to shift, not all at once, not through one dramatic event. It's almost like standing in a room you've known for years, and then, one day, a beam of light enters from a completely different angle. Nothing in the room has changed. Everything is still where it has always been. But suddenly, you see it differently. Wow, that's exactly how the energy of the Judgment card feels in this story. This person has started looking back. Looking back at old decisions, the times they avoided their feelings, the moments they ignored their intuition, the times they chose what felt familiar simply because it felt safe. And the more they reflect, the more they realize that some of those choices weren't making them as happy as they once believed. Some relationships stayed in their life far longer than they should have, simply because they became routine. Some environments demanded constant adjustment, even though deep down they knew they didn't truly belong there. Some people they once trusted slowly became a source of exhaustion rather than support. What's interesting is that there was a time when they could justify all of it. They always had a reason, always had an explanation, always had a way of convincing themselves everything was fine. But as they've grown, those explanations don't seem to carry the same weight anymore, because eventually, the truth becomes harder to ignore than the stories we tell ourselves. I also feel the energy of the Devil card very strongly here, not in a frightening way. More like the things that kept them stuck, old fears, old patterns, old beliefs that taught them to make themselves smaller than they really are. Maybe they were afraid of getting hurt. Maybe they were afraid of rejection. Maybe they were afraid of feelings that felt too real. And honestly, sometimes the things that trap us the longest aren't external circumstances at all. They're the stories we've been repeating inside our own minds. This person seems to have spent a long time resisting what their heart was trying to tell them, trying to rationalize everything, trying to analyze everything, trying to stay in control, trying to find one convincing reason why they should keep moving forward without looking back. But the more they fought it, the more exhausted they became, because deep down, part of them already knew something important. The problem was never really their feelings for you. The problem was that they weren't ready to face what those feelings were reflecting back to them. You showed up like a mirror, not to change them, but to help them see themselves more clearly. And honestly, that's rarely an easy thing. The Death card comes through here in a very profound way. There are parts of who they used to be that no longer seem to fit. Old beliefs, old defense mechanisms, old ways of loving, old ways of running away. It feels like everything is quietly moving through a period of transformation. From the outside, people around them may not notice much. Life may look relatively the same, but inside, there's a complete rearranging taking place. It's like renovating a house from the foundation up. That kind of process is rarely neat. It takes time. It gets messy. And it often comes with moments that force a person to ask difficult questions about themselves. Maybe that's why distance appeared between the two of you at one point. Not because the feelings disappeared, not because the connection stopped mattering, but because there were certain roads they needed to walk on their own. Some lessons can't be learned for us. Some growth can't be handed to us. And I feel like this person is finally beginning to understand that. The Wheel of Fortune card carries a very interesting feeling here. It's almost like the wheel of their life is slowly turning in a different direction. Things they once considered important are changing places. Priorities that used to sit at the top are being reevaluated. Old perspectives are making room for entirely new realizations. And as that happens, they begin looking at certain people in their life differently, especially the person who seems to occupy more of their thoughts than anyone else. Because while everything around them is changing, there's one truth that feels increasingly difficult for them to ignore. They're beginning to see your value in a way they never did before, and they're seeing it with a depth that feels entirely different from anything they've understood in the past. And I think what surprised them most wasn't anything you said. It was the way you lived your life. because some people make an impression almost immediately. And then there are people who stay on your mind for a very long time. You seem to belong to that second group. This person is beginning to realize that what makes you different has very little to do with trying to get anyone's attention. Actually, it's quite the opposite. The more they observe you, the more they realize you've never seemed interested in proving your worth to anyone. You don't carry the energy of someone searching for validation. You carry the energy of someone who already knows who they are, and wow, that leaves a much bigger impact than they expected. The Queen of Wands card comes through here in a really beautiful way, not as loud confidence, not as someone who walks into every room needing to be the center of attention, but as the kind of confidence that comes from within, the kind that belongs to someone who understands their value and doesn't feel the need to compete for space. Honestly, I feel like this person has been paying far more attention to you than you realize. They've noticed how you respond when things don't go your way. They've noticed how you treat people. They've noticed your strength. And they've noticed your softer side too. What's interesting is that the more they watch, the harder it becomes to place you into the familiar categories they've used to understand other people. Because you don't really fit them. You don't leave them wondering who you'll be from one day to the next. You don't leave them constantly questioning where they stand in your life. There's a sense of stability here, a very rare kind of stability. And that's exactly what brings in the energy of the Queen of Pentacles card. This person is beginning to understand something important. Some people bring excitement. Some people bring intensity. Some people create a rush of emotion. But not everyone creates a sense of peace. Not everyone feels safe to trust. And you seem to carry that energy naturally. Not because you're perfect, but because you're consistent. You say what you mean. You try to keep your word. You don't constantly reshape yourself just to make other people comfortable. And somehow, that feels incredibly reassuring to them. Far more reassuring than many of the experiences they've had in the past. I also feel like maturity has been changing the way this person looks at their own choices. And sometimes growth doesn't come from learning something new. Sometimes it comes from finally recognizing what truly matters. Maybe there was a time when they were drawn to things that looked impressive on the surface. Things that made their heart race. Dramatic connections, emotional highs and lows. Relationships that felt exciting because they were unpredictable. But over time, they're beginning to realize that peace has its own kind of attraction. And honestly, it may be even rarer. That's where the Temperance card seems to enter this story. It feels like this person is learning to experience life at a different rhythm. A little slower, a little deeper, a little more honest. They're no longer focused only on what feels good in the moment. They're starting to think about what can actually last. What allows them to feel like themselves? What helps them become a better version of who they are? And every time they reflect on those questions, your image seems to appear. Not in an overwhelming way, not in a way that makes them lose control, but more like a quiet presence, a familiar feeling. Almost like you've gradually become a new standard in their mind without either of you fully noticing it happen. And because of that, they're beginning to look at old relationships, old decisions, and old priorities through a completely different lens. Things they once accepted without question no longer feel quite right. Things they once ignored now catch their attention. Because when someone truly recognizes the value of something, it changes the way they see everything around it. And honestly, that's what feels like it's happening here. Not a sudden transformation, not one dramatic realization, but a growing awareness that becomes clearer with each passing day. Still, even after everything they've begun to understand, there's a part of them that doesn't fully know what to do with all of these feelings yet. Because recognizing someone's value is one thing. Allowing yourself to move closer to that person is something entirely different. And it feels like that's exactly where this story is beginning to lead them next. Because when someone begins to truly recognize another person's value, something else often happens too. They start noticing the distance between what they feel and what they've actually been showing. And honestly, that feels like the stage this person is moving through right now. From the outside, things may seem very quiet, not many words, not many obvious actions, not many signs that would be easy to point to. And sometimes that silence makes people assume they've moved on, that they no longer care, that whatever was there has been gone for a long time. But the energy I'm picking up feels very different. It feels more like someone pulling inward, because they're trying to process a lot of things in their life. Almost like stepping into a quiet room after being surrounded by noise for far too long. Not because they dislike the outside world, but because they need to hear their own inner voice more clearly. The Four of Swords card carries that feeling beautifully. There are seasons in life when a person doesn't need more answers. They need space. Not the kind of space that comes from giving up. The kind of space that comes from healing. I feel like this person has been carrying far more than they usually let people see. Pressure, responsibilities, unfinished chapters, old wounds they've convinced themselves were healed, even though those wounds still seem to echo somewhere beneath the surface. And when life starts asking them to take an honest look at everything, they can't keep running forever. Some wounds don't heal by staying busy. They don't heal by filling every empty hour. They don't heal by pretending they don't exist. I feel like this person is learning how to sit with themselves. And honestly, that's not easy, especially for someone who spent years solving problems through action. Someone who's learned to keep emotions locked away. Someone who's become very comfortable playing the role of the strong one. But sometimes real strength looks different. Sometimes real strength is admitting there are still parts of yourself that need care. The Hermit card comes through here and makes me think of very ordinary evenings. A person sitting alone after a long day. No distractions, no constant noise in the background. No attempt to escape what they're feeling. Just thinking. Thinking about where they've been, where they are now, and where they genuinely want to go from here. I feel like they've started asking themselves those kinds of questions. And what's interesting is that the more honest they become with themselves, the harder it becomes to deny what they feel about you. Not because they're forcing themselves to think about you, but because while they're reflecting on their life, your presence keeps appearing naturally, like part of what matters, like part of what they don't want to lose. I can also feel the energy of the Eight of Pentacles card very strongly here. While some people may think they've disappeared, I don't actually see that. I see someone working, building, trying to create a better foundation for themselves. They want things to improve. They want more stability, more maturity, more self-respect. They want to feel proud of the person they're becoming. Maybe they're focused on work. Maybe they're handling personal challenges. Maybe they're trying to repair parts of their life they've neglected for too long. Whatever it is, the effort feels genuine. Not the kind of effort designed to impress other people. The kind of effort that comes from wanting to respect yourself. And through all of this, I don't get the feeling they've completely disconnected from you. Actually, it feels quite the opposite. It's almost like they've kept you in a very private corner of their mind. Sometimes through memories. Sometimes through conversations. Sometimes through stories they share with someone they truly trust. The Page of Cups card makes me think of moments like that. Moments when your name unexpectedly comes up. Moments when something reminds them of you and they find themselves talking about it. Moments when they share thoughts they don't normally reveal to just anyone. Not with everybody. Only with the people who feel safe. Because even though they're moving through a deeply personal chapter right now, I don't feel like they've shut the door on their emotions. If anything, it feels like they're trying to understand themselves more clearly before deciding what they want to do with everything they're feeling. And as that process continues, I can't help but feel that something even deeper is beginning to take shape inside them. A change that isn't really about the past anymore, but about truths they may finally be ready to face. And honestly, I think that's exactly what's creating the biggest turning point in this story. Because there are certain seasons in life when we don't change, because someone asks us to. We change because we can no longer keep lying to ourselves. And it feels like this person has arrived at that kind of crossroads. Not overnight, not because of one conversation, not because of one dramatic moment, but because of countless small moments that slowly began adding up. Moments when they started recognizing what truly brings meaning into their life. Moments when they realized they had been investing too much energy into things that no longer felt aligned. And moments when they finally had to be honest with themselves about what their heart had been trying to say all along. The Judgment card comes through here almost like a wake-up call after a very long time spent living on autopilot. I feel like this person is looking at themselves with a level of honesty they once avoided. They're revisiting the choices that brought them to where they are now, the opportunities they let pass by, the emotions they pushed aside, the moments they chose silence over truth, the moments they chose distance over vulnerability. And what's interesting is that they're no longer looking at those memories from a defensive place. They're not scrambling to justify everything anymore. They're not trying to prove they were right. They're simply allowing themselves to see it. And honestly, that may be one of the hardest things a person can do. Because facing the truth often requires letting go of layers of protection that have been built over many years. The Ace of Swords card carries a strong feeling of clarity here. Things that once felt confusing are beginning to make more sense. Things they once questioned are being seen through a different lens. It's almost like a window that has been covered in fog for years is finally being wiped clean. The view outside hasn't changed, but the way they're looking at it has. And as that happens, they're beginning to understand something important. Not everything they once chased was truly valuable. Not everything they feared deserved that much power over them. And not everything they overlooked deserved to be ignored. There's a feeling here that they're starting to realize something very simple. Sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't the loudest things. They're not always the things demanding attention. Sometimes the most meaningful things are the ones that remain when all the noise fades away. Wow. The energy of the Sun card feels incredibly strong here, not as perfection, not as someone suddenly having everything figured out, but as authenticity. A person who no longer wants to live according to outdated expectations. A person who no longer wants to wear masks that have become exhausting to carry. A person who no longer wants to repeat cycles that have gone on for far too long. There's something very freeing about this energy, almost like they're finally taking a deeper breath, almost like they're giving themselves permission to be a little more honest than they've been before. And what's interesting is that the people around them seem to be noticing it too. I feel friends here, family members, people who have known them for years, people who have watched them move through different chapters of their life. And even if this person isn't saying much, the shift is still visible. It's there in their eyes. It's there in the way they think. It's there in the way they talk about the future. It's there in the way they speak about what truly matters to them. It feels like they're no longer trying to run from their emotions, at least not the way they once did. The Star card brings in a really beautiful energy here, because after everything they've been through, it feels like they're beginning to believe life doesn't have to repeat the same patterns forever, that they don't have to keep making the same choices, that they're allowed to take a different path if it feels more aligned with who they are becoming. Now, that doesn't mean they suddenly have all the answers. Honestly, I don't think that's what this energy is saying at all. But I do think they're getting closer to their own truth, closer to the person they genuinely want to be. And when someone starts living more honestly with themselves, they often begin looking at the important relationships in their life differently too. Especially a connection that has quietly followed them through so many thoughts, so many lessons, and so many interchanges. Because after everything that's beginning to come into the light, it feels like they're no longer asking themselves what they feel. The question is starting to change. They're beginning to ask themselves what they want to do with those feelings. And honestly, I think this is the biggest difference between who they are now and who they used to be. In the past, whenever emotions became too intense, their instinct was to pull away. Whenever things started feeling too real, they would find something else to focus on. And whenever their heart began speaking a little too loudly, they would hand control back to logic. But the energy feels very different now, not because every fear has disappeared, not because they've suddenly become a completely different person, but because they're tired of constantly running from themselves. The Knight of Pentacles card comes through very strongly in this chapter. This feels like someone who no longer wants to make impulsive decisions, someone who no longer wants to be ruled by temporary emotions, someone who doesn't want to make promises they're not ready to keep. It feels like they're rebuilding their life one piece at a time, one step, one choice, one foundation at a time. And sure, the process may not be fast. From the outside, it may not even look dramatic. But what I see here is the kind of change that has depth. It's almost like someone rebuilding a house using stronger materials than before. Because they're no longer thinking only about the present moment. They're thinking about what can actually last. I can also feel the energy of the King of Pentacles card very clearly. There's something incredibly mature about the way they're approaching life now. In the past, they may have focused mostly on feelings, or on whatever they wanted in the moment. But now they're asking different questions. How can I become someone more dependable? How can I create stability in my own life? How can I avoid repeating old mistakes? It feels like they no longer want to enter someone's life with nothing but beautiful words. They want to feel that what they bring has real value, that they can stand firmly on their own feet, that they can respect the person they're becoming. And honestly, that's why this just no longer feels like a story that's only about emotions. It's also a story about growth, about responsibility, about someone learning how to work with their heart instead of fighting against it. The Chariot card begins to appear very naturally here, not as reckless forward movement, not as rushing towards something, but as someone who is finally becoming clear about where they want to go. For a long time, it feels like they were being pulled in different directions. Fear pulled one way, hope pulled another. The past kept tugging at them. The future made them anxious. But now, those opposing forces seem to be finding balance. And as that balance begins to form, their path starts becoming clearer. I also feel the energy of the Six of Cups card showing up very gently, not as someone living in the past, but as someone realizing that certain connections leave a deeper imprint than we expect. Some people remain special no matter how much life changes around us. And it feels like they're finally understanding that. They're no longer trying to minimize the impact you've had on their life. They're no longer trying to convince themselves it was just a passing feeling. They're no longer giving it smaller names than it deserves. What I see instead is someone beginning to take this connection more seriously than they ever allowed themselves to before. And that's where the energy of the Lovers card becomes so beautiful. Because in the end, every journey brings us back to our own choices. Not choices made from fear. Not choices made from pressure. But choices made after truly understanding ourselves. After recognizing what matters. After moving through the lessons we needed to learn. And when I look at the final energy surrounding this reading, one thing feels very clear. This person is no longer standing where they once stood. The way they see life has changed. The way they see themselves has changed. And the way they see you has changed too. The Ten of Pentacles card carries the feeling of something that can be built through patience, maturity, and intentional choices. Not emotions that appear and disappear overnight, but something that develops over time. One step at a time. One day at a time. And honestly, that may be the most beautiful part of this entire journey. Not how quickly things change, but the fact that they're finally allowing themselves to move towards something their heart may have quietly recognized for a very long time. And with that, Leo, we're going to leave the energy here for now. I just want to say thank you for spending this time with me and allowing me to share this reading with you. As always, take what resonates, leave behind what doesn't, and trust your own inner wisdom above all else. You matter more than you know, Leo. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing this journey with me. I'll see you again in the next reading. Until then, take good care of yourself. Bye for now.